I think we can make a start. Good evening, everyone. You're very welcome at this meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband. To my right, my fellow councillors, and it will be the five of us who will be making the decisions about the matters in front of us this evening. To my left, I'm joined by officers who will be presenting the reports in front of us and offering us their advice. And this evening they're led by Amanda Reid, the Director of Planning, who is the lady sitting on my immediate left. Okay, so are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. There's no apologies this evening.
There are none. Are there any declarations of interest? Marwan.
Yes, Chair. I'm the councillor for Pontyville, where this...
Okay. All right. Are there any other declarations? No. Okay, that's good. In that case, we can move on. Now, we've got a number of sets of minutes that need to be signed. So can I ask colleagues if we can run through these? First of all, we have minutes of the meeting that was held on the 5th of October. I think most of us were present for that. Can I sign those as a record, please? Thank you. Then we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of October. Can I sign those, please? Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of November. Thank you. The minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of December. Thank you. And finally, the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 18th of January. Thank you. Very good. Okay, we can get to the agenda. Now we have two cases in front of us this evening. We're going to take Bus Space Studios in Conlon Street. We're going to take that first. June Taylor, June, you're going to present this, aren't you? So when you're ready, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So while the slides are loading, I'll just remind you of the addendum report which has been issued today, and this is just providing some minor factual corrections to the report and a few additional conditions. The site address is Bus Space Studios 1 to 51 Conlon Street, W105AP. And the proposal is for the demolition of the existing building and the redevelopment of the site for commercial and residential uses. Next slide. So some of the key features of the site and the surrounding areas I'll just point out on the following slide. So if we go to the next slide, this is an aerial image of the site from the south. And the site is the L-shaped building with the main frontage on the south side of Conlon Street and a second frontage on Middle Road to the west. The building was originally a bus depot, but was converted to light industrial use in 1984 after London Transport had relocated their bus operations and was further extended in the year 2000 at first floor and second floor. And it provides small commercial units, but is generally not in very good condition and has high vacancy rates. So if we go on to the next no, actually, can we go back to that slide? Sorry. Just to point out that St Mary's Primary School is immediately to the south of the site and shares a boundary, and the school buildings are to the south-east. And the nursery school building is immediately to the east of the site, and the playground is immediately to the south of the site. And Elmsley Horniman Pleasance Park is to the east across East Row, and the building to the north of the site, on the north side of Conlon Street, is the White Knight Laundry, which has now been demolished, and that site has planning permission for a 5 to 6 story commercial building. So on the just finish off on this slide, on Middle Row, on the west of the site, there is the Arc Brunel Primary School, and a residential block which is also 5 stories tall. So if we move on to the next slide, just to point out that Kensal Road, as I think you probably know, is immediately to the north of this particular block, and the canal is just to the north of that. The site is not in a conservation area, and there aren't any conservation areas nearby. The map on the right provides some interesting context. That's from 1955, and that just illustrates the range of different employment uses that have been sort of traditionally in the area. And as a result of this, the site and parts of the surrounding area have an employment zone designation, which is the most important planning constraint affecting the site. So if we go on to the next slide, this just shows you a view of the current building looking westwards along Conlon Street, and you can see the Middle Row housing development in the background there at the end of the road. And on the next slide, you can see the building from the other direction, which shows you the corner. So there's the Conlon Street and the Middle Row frontages, and on the corner there's a cafe which is still in operation and seems to be trading reasonably well. So on the next slide, this just provides some just a reminder of the emerging context of the area. All of the sites shaded in yellow are either have recently been redeveloped or are in the process of being redeveloped. So just to emphasise that it's an area that is undergoing quite a lot of change and redevelopment generally. So moving on to the next slide then, just to summarise the proposal. So the figures are perhaps not very easy to read, but they're reprinted in the committee report, and the proposal would lead to a significant uplift in the amount of commercial floor space on the site, and also would provide 30 residential units. As I mentioned before, there's an employment zone designation on the site, and our local plan policy allows for redevelopment involving residential use only where this is necessary to facilitate the uplift in the commercial floor space. The application has been viability tested, and officers are confident that this amount of residential floor space would be needed to subsidise the commercial floor space, and that the proposal couldn't support any affordable housing in addition to this. However, the development would be subject to financial viability review mechanisms, so we could potentially get a contribution to affordable housing if circumstances improve during the course of the development. So moving on to the next slide, this shows you the layout of the proposed ground floor of the building, for which you can see that the footprint of the building would essentially follow the footprint of the existing building. There would be a cafe area re-provided on the corner, which would be larger than the existing cafe, and would allow for an element of sort of flexible uses, and there'd be a reception and a core area which shared with the office floor space on the right-hand side on Conlon Street. and there are residential units on the middle row frontage on the side, and those there are 3 duplex units there with ground floor entrances, individual entrances on the street, and bedrooms on the mezzanine floor above. So moving on to the next slide. The upper floors of the building all follow the same pattern, except to say that the residential floor space would extend out over the corner, and the Conlon Street frontage would be entirely in office commercial use. And as you move up to the 3rd floor, 4th floor, 5th floor, the overall bulk of the footprint sort of progressively reduces to make the building appears less bulky. So moving on to the elevations on the next slide, there's the roof has a zigzag sculpted form which speaks to the sort of the industrial heritage of the area, and the building has an overall warehouse aesthetic, which is again sort of is in keeping with the industrial character of the area and surrounding buildings. Generally, we feel that the design is of a very high quality and has been sort of worked on quite a lot during the process to respond to officer comments and also to reflect the relationship with the school to the rear. So the elevation on the bottom is the middle row elevation, so that's the side elevation, and you can see that building there in the context of the development on the White Knight Laundry site across the road, and those 2 buildings would be of a similar height. So that's all I need to say on that, I think. And if we go to the next slide, this slide shows you some illustrative views of the proposal. So there's a view looking westwards, looking eastwards along Conlon Street there. And then if we go to the next slide, can't even see what that is. Oh yes, so on this slide, there's this view is looking westwards towards Middle Row, and then the second view is a south-facing view that shows you the corner of the building from Kensal Road. And the next slide just summarises some of the sustainability features of the site. So essentially the carbon dioxide emissions would be reduced to 52% across the site overall, which is in excess of the policy target and something that officers are very pleased with. And the next slide then, just to wrap up, in terms of the planning balance of the site, the proposal would deliver a significant uplift in commercial floor space and also new housing, so the principal development would be acceptable. The design, we feel, would be of high quality and responds well to the surrounding context. The impact on neighbour living conditions has been scrutinised very carefully and would be acceptable. Environmental performance and local environmental impacts have all been assessed very carefully and would all comply with the relevant policies. Transport and highways impacts have also been assessed and would be acceptable. So there are no reasons to recommend refusal. And the officer opinion recommendation is that the application should be approved subject to conditions and Section 106 legal agreement. Thank you, Chairman. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, there are no speakers for this case, so we move straight to questions to officers. Who'd like to go first? Tom Bedham.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much for the presentation. I had a couple of questions about the appearance of the building and the materials. So the first one is that it says in the report that there is a plan to reuse reuse and recycle the existing materials, but I think with an emphasis on reuse. It's a little bit hard to tell from the renders, but the existing building is clearly London stock, and the renders make it look like red brick. Is the plan to reuse that London stock brick? And if so, what will the appearance be?
Firstly, just to say the illustrations there are illustrative, so they're not necessarily exactly how the building would look in terms of its materiality. The reuse and recycling of the materials has been investigated quite thoroughly in their in their circular economy statement. So they've looked in quite a lot of detail about what the structure of the existing building is and what the practicalities of reusing parts of it would be. And circular economy principles generally are part of that design policies, so they're required under the London Plan Policy D3. There is a requirement to take circular economy principles into account, which they've done. They've submitted this statement, which is good practice. They've identified a lot of scope to do that. The extent to which they could actually reuse existing materials hasn't really been defined at this stage, because it's something they would have to consider in a lot more detail, so it would be part of the detailed design stage. But if you look in the addendum report, we've suggested an amendment to the materials condition, so that when they submit their condition with samples of materials that they're going to use, they have to include examples of where they would be reusing materials as far as practicable. So hopefully we can address it that way.
Thank you, that's helpful. Maybe that's something, Chairman, we can explore a bit more later, just because I do think there's a lot of London stock in the area, has a lot of character. If, you know, to the extent which they can reuse that and then buy more London stock to match it, I think would be really positive compared to what, and I appreciate that the renders are just illustrative, but the rather bland sort of modern red looking brick in their pictures, which aren't similar to the white brick of the new residential building opposite. They're not similar to the London stock elsewhere on Conlon Street. And so I think using London stock as much as possible for the brickwork there would be good for aesthetic reasons and for reuse, sort of circular economy reasons. Then the next question is on the metal facade, which again, appreciate the renders are just illustrative, but from what I can see in front of me, looks quite ugly. Is it? Can you? Because I think in the pack it just says. It just I can't remember the exact word, but it doesn't go into much detail. Just as metal, galvanized metal, I think it says. Can you tell us a bit more about it? Why we think it will be attractive in that location?
Just find the relevant part of the report.
Sorry, just to add to that, I mean, what I'm worried about is in that area, I know it's not a conservation area, but there is quite a lot of character to the buildings there. The new residential buildings, quite attractive, a lot of effort's gone into that, it's in brick. The old Telegraph Works building on Conlon Street in London Stock is a characterful, attractive building, and I'm just worried that we're going to get this big facade of metal and glass, which will have nothing really to do with the area and won't be very attractive. So that's my concern.
Yes, I think, I mean, partly it's that industrial warehouse sort of aesthetic that we felt would be sort of would sort of really respond to the heritage of that the industrial past of the area. And I mean, it's also about having the variety and variation in materials. So you would have a different kind of material on different facades would help then to sort of break up the sort of the sense of having a kind of a monotonous facade. So yes, I mean they would be sort of fairly sort of slim panels really. The aluminium panels would be fairly sort of tightly sort of contained. Do you see what I mean? So there wouldn't be a vast expanse of them.
I do see that, and you know, it's not like what you may have seen 10 years ago, where it's just full glass, which isn't very heat efficient and is more imposing, and I do appreciate that. But maybe it's just something sort of through condition of getting more details and materials later on. And I know the facade of such a sort of long building does need to be broken up a bit, and it is good to create a bit of a distinction between the office and the residential. But I just wonder if it goes a bit too far, and maybe through condition, through seeing, approving the materials at a later stage, we can find something which is a little bit more of a medium on the materials. But that's just a thought. I don't know what the rest of the committee think. And then, Chairman, can I ask one last question? Sorry. The last question is on the two sort of blank walls. So the one on the end of Conlon Street on the east side, and then the one on the south side on Middle Row. And they... I know there is some effort to show the original sort of roof line, so there's a slight break-up of that wall, but pretty much it's a big blank brick wall. And I just wonder whether a green wall or, you know, whether it's ivy or some sort of planting green wall or something to make it look a bit more interesting. And if it was a green wall, would obviously have air quality benefits, would be appropriate.
Thank you. I think that green walls tend to be a bit problematic in terms of fire safety. I think they tend to sort of be perceived as a fire risk. So we tend not to encourage them. But yes, I mean there are ways we can address that. I mean, one way might be through the public art strategy, because they could maybe use that blank flank elevation of the building might be somewhere where they could sort of cite some sort of art installation, might be an example. I mean, there is another elevation facing onto the school playground, which is part of the residential part of the building, but that would actually have some windows in it, so that would be sort of broken up by the arrangement of windows, whereas the one facing onto the nursery school, I think it's not really practical maybe to put windows in there because of the proximity to the nursery school. But at the same time, that would be a sort of a relatively small-scale part of the building. That's only a 3-storey height, and there would be a landscaped terrace on the top of that part of the building, which would sort of break up the sort of the impression of just having a plain building a little bit.
Okay, well, it's hard to say sort of here and now exactly what the right thing to do, and again from the renders it's not, you can't really tell exactly what it's going to look like, but I just wonder whether some consideration should be put in. You know, it does border onto the school, it's a big wall, whether it's fake windows, whether it's a green wall that isn't flammable, something along those lines would be worth exploring. And if it's not possible, it's not possible, but it'd still be good to explore that maybe through condition at a later stage. That's my only thoughts.
We could propose an additional condition to require details of how those elevations would be detailed to make them look more interesting. I don't know, perhaps we could include that in the materials condition, or we could make it a separate condition. So we'd be quite happy to look at doing that.
That sounds very sensible, and whatever you think is right in terms of separate condition or part of the materials, if colleagues agree.
Gerard.
Thank you. What I'm going to talk about, you partially dealt with in paragraph 6.47, but this is obviously a considerably larger building than what's there now, and I'm just, a lot of the objections are really not about a development, but about the size of it. I'm just wondering whether your comments on the size of it in this area, and if particularly you just look at the picture, the illustrative view of proposal, that sort of narrow, almost canyon-like appearance. So it's just my concern about the size of it, really, in this area.
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, it is bigger than the existing building, but if you think back to the emerging context slide, I put that slide up just to emphasise how much the surrounding area is being redeveloped with buildings of a similar sort of scale. I mean, there is the White Knight Laundry building opposite, which is of a similar sort of bulk. It's 5 to 6 stories. There's both the Art Brunel School and the residential building on Middle Row opposite are also of a 4 to 5 story height. So they're of a similar sort of scale as well. There are buildings on Kensal Road that are also sort of fairly large scale. So it's not really out of keeping with the emerging context. We don't think, if you look at other buildings like that are being developed or have been sort of built recently, in terms of the canyoning effect along Conyon Road, we felt that because on the first, second, third floors, then there's a straight building frontage. On the fourth floor above that's set back with a planted terrace and a different material treatment. It's a translucent facade, so that would just sort of help to reduce that canyoning effect. Do you see what I mean? Because that top floor of the building is set further back. You don't notice it so much from the street. It becomes sort of much softer, more imperceptible. Similarly, on the Middle Row frontage, the top floor of the residential part of the building is set back from the main building. So again, from street level, you're not so conscious of it. Is that helpful as a?
Yes, in a way. In a way, what you're saying about the other larger buildings around almost adds to the concern that there's a lot of large buildings around, which is making the area feel quite enclosed, and we're going to put another large building on there. So, but it is what it is. It's just this area is now becoming quite heavily developed, isn't it? With tall buildings.
Yes, I do see your concern. I mean, I think the only thing that I could say is that there are other buildings around there that probably are less likely to be redeveloped. So there's the two-storey housing on the other side of Conlon Street on the east end of Conlon Street. That's not really very likely to be redeveloped because those houses would be in separate ownership. So that's likely to stay in the same, so the school buildings are likely to stay of the same sort of scale that they are now, and then the park wouldn't be redeveloped because we don't really support development on park land, so the park would remain open. So there would be areas that would still be open, but I think with the situation being as it is now, we have to try and meet our housing targets, deliver new housing, deliver new floor space for businesses. So we have to look at making the best use we can of sites like this and trying to sort of build to a slightly higher density than there is now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, just continuing on that theme about the tall buildings, You talk in section 6.31 about the increased sense of enclosure on the residential properties to the west of the site. So I get everything you're saying about the tall buildings, but there are still some quite small residential buildings around this building, and I guess I'm just concerned when you say the building height would increase from 2 to 6 stories. I mean, that's quite a big increase. That's really going to affect the people that live around there. So could you talk a little bit about those smaller residential properties and how they'll be affected?
Yes, so there are three or four houses further south on Middle Row, which are immediately south of the site, past the school playground. So they're sort of side on, if you like. So it's the impact on them really wouldn't sort of be direct, because you, in your house, you've got your front windows and your back windows, and that's where your main focus is. That's where you get your daylight and your sunlight and your sort of sense of open space from. Obviously you have a garden as well, so in your garden you can sense the area around you. And so for the last house in that row, the garden space, they have a side view out across the school playground and across a building that is 1, 2, 3 stories, not very tall, and they'll have less of a sense of space from that garden area, and similarly for the other gardens that are along there. But that's not that's not an impact that we think is significant enough to prevent development. It's not. It doesn't affect the sunlight that you get to your garden, because the site is to the north of those houses, so it won't affect them in terms of sunlight. The daylight impacts on. There are a couple of windows in those properties that face directly onto the site, and the impact on those has been assessed, but isn't a significant issue, and. Generally, as I said before, generally your windows sort of face forward, front and back, and so in terms of sort of daylight impacts, they're not really impacted.
And are those that little row of houses, are they the only ones that are sort of the 2-story? I mean, I know there's some on Southern Row, but they feel a little bit further away from. I mean, they're objecting, but I don't feel like they're massively affected. Are there any other smaller houses like the ones you've just described?
There are a few on Southern Row, but they're further away, so they've been assessed as well in the daylight sunlight addendum, but the impact on them is not within the sort of the threshold that would cause us concern.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question as well, if I can. So my other question is about the affordable housing, which you touched on in your presentation. You said, it's not feasible here, and they won't be providing any. I mean, this is a big site with 30 housing units. Can you tell us a bit more about why they won't be providing any affordable housing?
Yes, so the applicants submit a financial viability appraisal with their application, and that assesses what residential sales values they estimate they can get, what they think they can let the commercial floor space for, so what income they can get out of the development, and how much they think it will cost them to build it. And then they look at the value of the site that's there now and how that is offset by the costs and the income of the development. And then we employ a firm of a separate firm of consultants to review their appraisal and to see if they agree with it. And the developers pay for that process, but that's done on behalf of the council to make sure that the financial viability is sound and robust, if you like to. And our consultants found that the development would result in a deficit of £9 million. So once you've accounted for construction costs, residential sales, the amount that you could sort of get from your commercial floor space, there's an allowance for developer profit in there as well, but it's set at a particular percentage of the value of the scheme. So developers aren't able to make excessive profits, but there's an allowance for their profit, which reflects the level of risk that they take. And our assessors came to the conclusion that there would be a deficit of £9 million in that development. So because of that, if you're going to provide affordable housing, you need to have a surplus. You need to have a development that makes profit over and above a sort of a standard level of developer profit, because then there's a surplus that you can devote to providing affordable housing. Because affordable housing doesn't bring in the income that private housing does. It's not as profitable, obviously. So you need to be able to generate that surplus, and if you can't, then we can't insist on them providing any affordable housing. So,
I mean, do you find that surprising?
Personally, no, because I have seen similar situations in other developments. It's quite common, particularly at the moment, because obviously construction costs have been increasing quite a lot recently. There's been a lot of inflation. It's above sort of general sort of consumer inflation. Construction costs have been going up quite considerably, and residential sales values have been quite weak. The residential sort of sales market is quite uncertain. Commercial floor space is not always easy to let. So there's a lot of sort of uncertainty in the economy, and that affects the profitability of development at the moment. The way we deal with that is to have the viability review mechanisms that they sign up to, that they have to agree to, and so when they've built it and they've occupied part of it, and they know how much they can sell their flats for, they know how much it costs to construct it. They review the viability then, and we check it again with them to see if then it turns out to be more profitable than they'd expected, then we can then secure some of that extra profit as a contribution to affordable housing. But at the moment, it's not. We concluded that it's not viable to do that.
Yeah, I mean, so I do understand what you're saying, and obviously we all know about the inflationary costs on construction and development. But I mean, this really concerns me, because are we just going to end up with a whole load of large developments and no affordable housing? I mean, is that what's going to be happening now?
We can, we can only determine the applications in line with policy.
No, I mean, it's a kind of a question for us as well, a little bit.
Well, I think that perhaps I can carry on from Councillor Siren's point. I think the issue here is that this is an employment zone, so our ability to say, well, actually, do we really need office space in this location? That would be contrary to policy. You could say, here we've got proposed rather a large building, well, fairly large building. Why couldn't it mostly be residential? And the implication would be there could be some affordable housing. But unfortunately, as I understand it, our policies say you can't do that, because you have to retain this large amount of office commercial space. Is that correct? Is that the way it works?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in this case, you're right, because it's an employment zone, the commercial floor space takes priority, and is our first priority is to re-provide that. So the private residential tends to be the most profitable form of development, and so that subsidises the commercial floor space, which is less profitable overall and more uncertain. And affordable housing is sort of further down the queue in terms of policy priorities in this particular location then, because of the employment zone.
I've got a couple of questions, quick ones. Picking up on what's been said earlier, particularly by Councillor Bennett, is it feasible to add a condition? I was looking here, and we don't seem to have any conditions really about materials, which we normally do have in any sort of reasonably large application. Could we put something in that?
Sorry, Chairman, that's condition 39. It's slipped sort of towards the end, but it is in there.
Sorry, my apologies. It's normally like sort of condition 3 or condition 4 or something like that. Right, samples of materials. Okay, yes, sorry, I beg your pardon, that's my fault. So I think it would be feasible for us to take on board the comments that Councillor Bennett made about not having, I think it's really, if I've understood, Tom, it's about having enormous expanses of sort of galvanised metal and glass. So you've got this sort of slab of metal and glass facade essentially created on Conlon Street. Is that fair, Tom? That's yes. So I think, I mean, is that something that we can simply note, and so officers take account of that when it comes to the discharge of condition 39? Can we do that? Is that a sensible way of doing it?
Yeah, there is a condition on railings and balconies as well, and balustrades. Yes, if you leave it with us, we'll see if we can further amend that condition to deal with the concern about the metal work.
Because I think the point, I mean, I agree with colleagues that particularly sort of galvanised metal can look terribly dated very quickly, and if there's an enormous amount of it, then it's sort of rather, it rather places the building in time in a rather unhelpful way, perhaps. Councillor Hargreaves.
Just also, Chairman, thank you. Just adding to that is the brickwork. I think Tom made a very important point about the brickwork there, and it's a particularly attractive brick, and it would be a shame. The danger is we're getting lots of different textures coming in that area now, lots of different bricks and designs, and it would be nice to retain something from the heritage of that area. Yeah.
Is that again something that we can take on board? Officers can have regard to that when they're looking at condition 39 and the further discussions which obviously take place with the applicant?
Yes.
Is that something we can do? Yeah.
Yes, certainly, Chairman. We have already proposed amending that to include details of sort of reusing existing brickwork.
And we're quite happy.
Materials.
We're quite happy that the condition itself does cover all of these matters, so we don't have to amend the condition, because we can actually give effect to the committee's. I mean, I haven't explicitly asked everybody, but I'm rather assuming that we'd all feel more or less the same about this. Are we, officers, are we content that that's going to be okay?
Chairman, can I just come in at this point? I think it would be useful if you just reiterate in list form the points that you're trying to include, just so we can review, obviously at this meeting, not later, whether we think that that condition is going to cover all your points. Because I think I heard during the conversation there was the use of London stock, which I think, as the condition is proposed in the addendum and requiring them to submit further details of the reuse of the existing bricks, almost dictates that actually they will need to use a brick that matches the reused bricks anyway. So I think that is covered. I heard a point around the galvanised steel facade. What I would caution there is that clearly under the condition, what we couldn't do is completely secure a different material. So, for instance, a brick facade on that building. I think that would be stepping away from the scheme that's before you and trying to redesign it through the condition. Now, you know, clearly you can express concerns about that material, and we can look at this condition and how it might be varied, or whether it, in the current wording, it allows for exploration of a material that that obviously fits in with the scheme as submitted. But I think it would be, my view, refer to Amanda ultimately, would be that a condition that ultimately required a completely different material for that, on that facade, would be stepping away from the scheme that's before you, and is not necessarily something that we could do. So whether it's about refining the kind of material to make it to improve it, or whether you're just not happy with the galvanised metal.
Yeah. Well, obviously we can't at committee right now go and look round every single building in that area, but and see, you know, what would really fit in and what would be appropriate. But at the moment, where it says galvanised metal, that is quite broad and could mean a number of different things. And I think when the condition to provide samples and details of the materials is exercised, what I would like officers to do is to see sort of the extent to which effort has been made to fit those materials into the context. I mean, because galvanized metal could be something bright, shiny aluminium, it could be bronze, you know, it could be a sort of black metal, I assume. Anyway, there's a lot of different, and it can be done in different ways. So, you know, if the applicant wanted to introduce a different material like some additional brick, that would be up to them. I appreciate we can't require that at this committee. But certainly in terms of exercising that condition, I would just like to see some effort made towards blending it into the context of the local area. And in my opinion, shiny, bright metal and glass, sort of aluminium, for example, wouldn't achieve that.
Okay, so I think that's understood. And my view, I'll defer to June and Amanda on this, but is the condition as worded covers your concerns, and obviously it's for officers taking that forward to understand, you know, the specifics of what you said and ensure that that's delivered.
Thank you. Through the chairman, in listening to what's been said so far, it seems to me that all of the above have been captured. So in taking Martin's point about the list, committee members are drawn to draft condition number 19, part B, which requires the submission of detailed plans in relation to the railings and balustrades. I then take you to draft condition 39, part B, which requires sample panels showing the colour, texture, jointing, face bond, mortar and pointing, in respect of the brick, which takes us to the addendum where 39A is proposed to be amended if accepted by this committee, making explicit reference to the reuse of the existing brickwork and other materials where practicable. So it would appear, Chairman, that those items have each been captured in the officer recommendation.
I think that's helpful. And the final point that was made earlier relates to some of the blank sort of flank walls. In particular, there's one that faces onto, I think, St Mary's Primary School playground. Presumably, there is nothing to stop the school, possibly with the assistance of the developer, in having planting on that to make it maybe less stark marginally, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's a matter of vital importance, but I think planting on the certainly facing the school would soften what inevitably has to be quite a large blank wall, essentially, because clearly facing onto a school, it can't really be otherwise. Is that something to be put in as an extra condition, or just an informative, or something to be noted by officers? What do you think is the best way of dealing with that issue?
I think that planting that sort of takes us back to the issue with the fire safety that always comes up at building control stage. I mean, we could certainly secure some sort of detailing on that elevation to make it more interesting. I don't know if the developers would agree to the school getting involved in some sort of painting it. When you look at the boundary brick wall between the school and the site now, that's painted with various things. So that might be acceptable. It might be something that we can explore.
Well, what I would suggest is I really don't think, colleagues, I don't think we need to get into an argument about the fire-resistant qualities of wisteria, or we really don't need to spend time. I think it's sensible if officers and the applicant, who I'm sure is listening to our conversation, that they have a discussion perhaps between themselves to see what can be done in relation to this point. And I think I suspect that's as far as we sensibly can go as a committee. Okay, is that helpful? Okay, well, in that case, I think can I move to a decision, colleagues? Are there any further questions? Okay, so the recommendation is to grant permission. Obviously, there's going to be a Section 106 agreement for this, and with the conditions set out in the report and also the addendum report, as we've discussed. And we've also mentioned that obviously officers and indeed the applicant will have noted our discussion this evening. So in that case, can I see those in favour of the recommendation, please? Okay, so that is agreed. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So we now move on to consider the other application in front of us, which is the Nottingdale Heat Network. And Emma Gore, Emma, you're going to present this, I think. Yeah, are you, when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good evening.
So the application before members this evening is for the erection and creation of a heat network on the Lancaster West estate in the Nottingdale ward to the north of the borough. The heat network will consist of excavation for the laying of pipework and 4 primary areas of above ground work to facilitate the heat network. So the 4 primary areas of above ground works can be illustrated here. So you'll note on my screen the lowest building in blue, which is Treadgold House, which will feature screening to plant that has already been approved by a previous planning application in 2022. You will note the white building sandwiched between the 2 blue buildings on my screen, which is Kensington Leisure Centre, for which additional plant will be placed on the roof of the building and will also be enclosed by protective screening. Then along Bonmore Road, which runs to the front of the leisure centre, a thermal store will be erected for the holding of hot water. And then if we travel north to the buildings of light green, there will be a renewable energy centre where the electric boilers will be contained within the existing envelope of Camelford Walk. And those are the 4 primary areas of above ground works. The network will replace the existing gas network that's featured on the site, on the estate, which consists of 80% of the properties being served by that network, with individual gas boilers serving 20% of those homes. The renewable heat network will be 100% renewable. It will reduce carbon emissions across the estate by 31%. Energy reduction will be seen, energy reduction in usage will be perceived by 25% of the properties across the estate, and 826 properties will be served by this first phase of the heat network. So on the aerial image in front of you, you'll see the 4 areas of above ground works labelled. A is where the thermal store will be featured. B is where the additional plant will be located on the Kensington Leisure Centre roof. C, which is just to the north there, is where Camelford Walk's existing gas boiler room is, and where the new electric boilers will be placed, and improvements to the existing community garden in the form of screens and additional planting will occur. And then D is Treadgold House, where we'll just see decorative screening surrounding plant work that's already been approved. So on this plan, you'll see the extent of the pipe network, which starts to the south of Treadgold House, extends up to the Academy, then travels north, terminating at Cambourne Mews. The pipe network is approximately 0.27 hectares, and then you'll see in the green, again, those 4 areas of above ground works highlighted for members. So the heat network operates by capturing hot air from the atmosphere by the heat pumps and the air source and water source heat pumps that will be featured at roof level. And then that heat is transferred to the water in the thermal store, which is then distributed across the heat network, with the electric boilers kicking in to generate any lapses in power. So this is the leisure centre. This is photos of the leisure centre. So the thermal store will be placed approximately where that existing light column sits, in front of the building. And then these are images along Bonmore Road, facing towards the site where the thermal store would be placed. And then this is on your right-hand side of the screen, a picture from the existing pedestrian walkway from the leisure centre entrance, looking down towards the thermal store's location. So this is a 3-dimensional render of the thermal store situated against the context of the leisure centre, and you'll see Bonmore Road working its way in front of that thermal store. These are some 3-dimensional images of the thermal store during the day and night. The thermal store will be created with the use of a lightweight aluminium screen, which is perforated, which will encapture that thermal store, and it will be internally and externally illuminated. This design choice is a cohesive design choice across the above ground works, which have been designed as a co-design project with members of the community, and indeed has been reviewed by QRP, who have provided us advice on this scheme. Here you have a section of the thermal store situated against the leisure centre, and a floor plan of its siting against just outside of the leisure centre entrance. The second area will be the additional plant, air and water source heat pumps located on the leisure centre roof. So there's just some pictures of the leisure centre roof for you. And this is an image of that additional plant, which will sit against that much larger L-shaped plant work that sits on top of the roof currently. And this is a section of the leisure centre roof, including that additional plant and acoustic enclosures. So as we travel northwards, we get to Camelford Walk, where we see the boiler rooms, which are contained in that existing ground floor envelope. The boilers will be removed and the new electric boilers installed. That won't change the dimensional qualities of that particular part of the building. We'll see the loss of the flue that you see in the background there. And I'll just draw members' attention to the top of this area, which contains the existing community garden, which has drawn the inspiration for the design of the scheme, and is a community garden that's much valued by residents on the estate. So this is an image, firstly, of the existing communal garden, which will be subject to improvements, and then those screens which will sit around the boiler room, drawing people's attention to its connection with the heat network and functioning as an educational tool for people to understand how the network operates. These are some images of how that will look, and you'll see the reflection of the perforated screens from the thermal store produced here on the screens around Camelford. Lastly, we come to Treadgold House, where an additional screen will be placed around existing plant work to tie in to the rest of the heat network's design. You can see that just on the image on the right-hand side of this screen. So that concludes my presentation. The recommendation is set out in the members' papers, and I would draw your attention to the addendum report. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No one's registered to speak for this. So we move straight to questions. Gerard, would you like to go first?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, the thermal store is a big feature of this, a visible feature. You talked about community engagement, resident engagement. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that came up with this design, please?
Of course, so as part of the application, a statement of community involvement was submitted, and the heat network was developed in line with the community, so they had a lot of say in how the proposal came forward, including the siting and the design. QRP concurred with the idea that the thermal store should be a feature of this particular network, and certainly I think when you look at that design and you look at the perforated screening, what that's doing is providing visual interest to the thermal store rather than sort of a much more mundane industrial style store left without screening. So I think that's important. But the community has been a big part of this, and they I think in their representations they requested that it be a focal point of the estate. There was a big demand for internal and external illumination of it, and I think its presence also is highlighted to be an educational tool, so people can see elements of the heat network and see how it works in line with all of the benefits it brings in terms of reduction of heat demand and reduction in carbon emissions, which falls in line with our policies as well.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing it when it's finally built.
Any other questions? Tom.
Just on the same point, really, on the tower, and the similar features around. I mean, they're a little bit wacky, but I actually quite like them. But how can we make sure that they continue to look good 20, 30 years from now?
Well, I think the proposed materials that they're looking to use is aluminium, which is fairly hard wearing, and certainly we've asked for samples of that material to be submitted to us so we can be assured of its quality. In terms of the longer term maintenance of the heat network, I think that probably is a matter for the applicant to consider, but I think when you think about the strength of the fabric that we're expecting to come through, given this has gone through both the quality review panel and members of our own design team, we'll certainly be scrutinising those samples to make sure that they're of a hard wearing nature. I think also it's important to note that some of this will of course be at roof level, so there are elements of it which will be much less visible from the public realm. And I think that's sort of how we would secure it through the planning stage.
Good, I think that's helpful. Excuse me. Yes, I agree with my colleagues. I think having some sort of architectural screen around the thermal store. I actually think I think wacky was used that. I quite like it actually in a way. I think if there was no architectural feature, then I think there'd be a danger of the inspiration appearing to be the old, the former ICI paints division in Slough, whereas I think this looks rather splendid in many ways. I think if it's built out using good materials, I think it could look rather attractive. Actually, it'd be quite distinctive and attractive. Are there any other questions? Marwan, sorry, I beg your pardon. I jumped in ahead of you.
Thank you, Chair. No, I think it's quite an extensive report, and thank you very much for bringing it to this level. One observation regarding the pumps on top of the leisure center. Pumps, how many? I'm a bit concerned regarding later on in terms of noise. On that aspect, what mitigation do we have in place? Where is it here? I know you conducted some noise testing of some sort, but how this will be in actual implementation term? And the other one is excellent. I think everyone there is good. Thank you.
So the application was accompanied by an acoustic assessment, which was reviewed by our environmental health officers. The mitigation proposed was largely in the form of acoustic enclosures, which they feel will be satisfactory. We've also laid out conditions within the report to ensure that once switched on, that noise will have to meet our minimum standards, and if it isn't, then it has to be switched off until that situation can be resolved. So mitigation in terms of acoustic enclosure and conditions to control the noise level once brought into operation will control that process alongside other environmental health legislation which has control over noise in the area. Also, it's going to sit next to some existing plant on the leisure centre, and the expanse of the leisure centre roof does provide some distance from residential properties.
Very good. Well, if there are no further questions, I think we can probably move to make a decision. Excuse me. So the recommendation is to grant with the conditions attached, in particular relating to enclosures and noise and things like that. So can I see those in favour, please, of the recommendation? So that is agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that concludes our business for the evening. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Thank you. Good night.